Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Universal Dialect Show. I'm your host, Cypher73, Chris Cabrera, and I have an exquisite guest on today. I heard him on another podcast, and some of the stuff that he was talking about was mind-blowing, so I had to have him. Honestly, I didn't think I was going to be able to because I figured he'd be extremely busy. But my guest today is Shane Bales, also known as the Ruiner, aka Shane Sedore. How you doing, sir?
All is well. And yeah, just to clarify the names, I use Shane Sedore as a writing name. I was born Shane Sedore. I got adopted when I was 6, which is where the Bales last name comes from. So it's my legal name. But yeah, just for there's some other projects I'm working on, I've been using Sedore. So they're both my last name. I actually have ID in both. So technically I'm two people.
Hey, it's better than being one person, right? Sometimes you can just flip the script whenever you want to, right?
That's right.
You're a blogger on the ruiner777.blogspot.com. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I mean, I wrote a blog that is there, but I wouldn't really call myself a blogger. The story behind that was I was writing it. Uh, at the time, I had a bunch of people who had kind of just got out of programs, projects, and cults that I was emailing with, kind of like a small group. And there was about 13 when it started. It ended up being about 20. But someone had suggested writing a cryptic blog so that I didn't have to write 13 to 20 emails every day, right? Or like, and they all kind of had the same questions. So one of them kind of organized a list and gave me the list, and I started writing in that way. And I put it up so that, it could be, if someone stumbled upon it, they might not even know really what it was, but the people who I was writing it for would. And I think the only reason the alternative community ever found it was one of them is titled Avians. And at the time, someone was making up a story about blue avians that became really popular. And yeah, I think the search results led one to the other. And because I was kind of connected with both that individual and the researcher he was speaking through, yeah, everyone kind of gravitated towards the blog. It got posted on David Icke's forum. The rest of his history. So yeah, it was never intended to be something that was ongoing or available to the public. I added to it because the public found it. I changed up the way I did it because the public found it. But the original intention was for a smaller group of people.
I got you, and we'll get into the quote unquote blue avians later. But you're also, from what I understand, a musician. I don't know if this still exists on the Unraveling Music. Is that still continuing?
The
.com?
band is Unraveling Music, yeah. And there's another band, earlier band called The Mind Site, which is probably the two that you're getting confused. But yeah, I just a singer for The Mind Site. Actually, just a singer, I guess, for both of them. So yeah, I sing and write vocals for both of those bands.
What type of music?
One is kind of similar to like a Tool or a System of a Down, or some people think of Linkin Park, because we did have two vocalists. And then the other one is very similar to like a Nine Inch Nails, but we're kind of getting into new territory, doing something that's a little bit Nine Inch Nails meets R&B, kind of like the Weekend type stuff now. So
Okay, cool, awesome. All right, so and you're also a former member of the Illuminati bloodline, correct? Or is
well, I guess Bloodline you can't really be a former of. And yeah, I was an active member of what the public calls the Illuminati, which is essentially just an umbrella organization that looks after all the different secret societies and all of the different intelligence agencies all over the world, to keep it all under one umbrella or one pyramid. And yeah, that's I was raised by those people, being groomed to be one of them. At the time when I wrote the blog, I couldn't really say what that organization was going to be, but I hinted at this organization that I was being groomed for. And now it's a very popular World Economic Forum. Everyone knows who it is and can kind of see the writing on the wall in terms of why someone like me might have been groomed for something like that. But yeah, I think that's the first time I tried to get out. I was about 13.
all right. So listen, what's your origin story? Let's just get into like where you were born and raised, because I think that that has a lot to do with the path that you're on now. Okay. Yeah. So where were you born and raised? And then don't leave any details out. I mean, this is, as much detail as possible. And then your upbringing, and then what led you on the current path that you're on right now.
Well, I was born, I live in Canada, Ontario, Canada, currently in Muskoka area. I was in Toronto for the last 10 years. I was born in a town called Bradford, and no, I guess Newmarket, but I lived in Bradford at the time. I have family ties to that organization. They don't take everybody who's related to them. Like not every kid born into that family gets used in this way. The reason I was selected was because I was exhibiting extrasensory perceptions, or what people would call psychic type activity. So I guess I was 4 when I was introduced to what would become my first handler. It was more or less I was taken to my first underground establishment and run through a series of tests. And then the end result was that I was.
So Shane, what your parents, they allowed this to happen? Did they know about this? Was this something that
No, they didn't
happened?
know.
They didn't know. So you just got essentially abducted?
Well, no, it was a family member, right? So a lot of it was
Okay.
very inconspicuous, right? My family was tied into it. Certain branch of my family and certain individuals within that branch were tied into it. So one family member very inconspicuously took me out one day and
Ah,
introduced me, right? And
okay.
the kind of cover for the way that that would work was anytime I had to go there, I was either picked up by that family member or I was sent to stay with my aunt, which was kind of this. We all know how families get sometimes. Not all branches talk to each other, right? So there was this particular. There's 2 branches in my family that nobody really interacts with except for me. So one branch had taken me. The other one is that aunt that I would go stay with, right? So as an example, I have 2 younger brothers, and they didn't know that side of those 2 sides of our family.
Okay.
So
Now, do they have the same gifts as you or no?
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody does, but theirs were never quite as turned on as mine were.
All right. They weren't as prominent and
Yeah,
it didn't
yeah.
like catch any eyes, I
I
guess.
guess the story was that like I didn't speak for a long time when I was a kid, and then when I finally did, I recited the entire movie of the Never-Ending Story front to back, staring at a wall.
Oh,
So
great movie.
yeah, they were like, yeah, it freaked everybody out, and
Wow.
that's where it kind of started. And yeah, so yeah, I was introduced then. Obviously, I was a fit candidate, so they brought me in. And yeah, I mean, when you're growing up through that, there's a lot of dangling carrots, as I call them. They make you feel special. They tell you you're special. You are special, right? And you know things that other kids don't know, and you're getting shown things that the rest of the world thinks is myth and legend and fiction, right? So there's a lot of incentive to keep your mouth shut. As you start to get older, obviously, when you're a kid, you're being used in things like rituals. You're not participating in them. As you get older, they try to push you into the participation side, right? That do back to others what has been done to you. And a lot of people would follow it because it seems normal to them. It's been normalized. But that was my first divergence where I was just like, I'm not going to do anything like that to another person. Like, no, right? And I was only about 13 at the time, and that was the first time I tried to get out of it because they started, threatening me and punishing me for the things I would not do. And I learned very quickly that you can't really get out of things like that very
Right.
easily, if at all. So I ended up that became my incentive to continue to participate, was the fact that I was worried for, people in my life
Right.
disappearing and whatnot.
Were they threatened? Like, because I'm saying, like, as a kid, I mean, you're getting punished for something that you know you're not supposed to do. I would imagine that maybe there's a part of you that's like, oh, I'm going to tell my mother and my dad, and they probably they threaten you with
Oh yeah,
talking.
and as a kid, like my parents wouldn't believe it, right? And
Right.
they were the first place I went, and they just thought I was making something up. So I had gone to a family member who I thought would actually listen to me, and they did, and they believed me, and they called the police. The next thing I know, said family member was missing, and said
Wow.
police officer who made first contact was no longer available, and there was a doctor I spoke to, and doctor went missing. And so that's when I started to realize I can't tell people this, right? So
Right.
yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. All right, so this group, they're known as the Illuminati, or do they have other names? And what's the real definition of what they are? Like who are they or it?
Well, the Illuminati is just a name that we have for them. I use it because it's familiar to everybody, right? They have their own name, which probably wouldn't make sense to most people because it's actually like a name, kind of like Chris or like Shane, right?
Yes.
And I can't say that, or I just wouldn't, because it's not a smart thing to do. There are certain rules I still have to follow. Not naming certain names and certain locations are one of them. So I call them the Illuminati because everybody else does, right? And
Right.
basically what they are. So I guess we have to backtrack a little bit. This planet has been kind of owned and controlled by an off-world species that is typically called Draco, or they are a reptilian ET species. In order to not have to interact with us directly, they created a group, a small group that they called the Parents, or I have called the Parents for public consumption, that essentially have life extension technologies similar to like vampirism, something like that. That makes it so that they're, for all intents and purposes, immortal. They don't die. They would be able to live a very, very long time. And they do that for the same reason the CIA lasts any American president, because, or the deep state exists, right? Because, you know, if you're going to change over leadership every 4 years, you need something that's consistent. So that was their version of the same type of concept. This consistent group of people who would be in charge of everything, kind of take their orders directly from them. That way they don't have to actually interact with here as much as they would have to otherwise. And then, yeah, the pyramid kind of starts there. So start with parents. Each parent has their own, we call them covens. So little groups that, are close to them. And then below that is where you start to get into all the public structures, like the militaries and the governments and the secret societies and everything else kind of falls below that initial part of the pyramid, which everyone's kind of known. I mean, I shouldn't say everyone's kind of known. People who are into this type of information, I've observed them figure out through research that there is this hidden hand controlling the public that has infiltrated governments, militaries, corporations, all of that jazz. And it would make sense that people think that's kind of the top of the pyramid, and you can see how that would go down. So I guess what I brought forward was the way that the structure looked even above them, right? And people think of like Freemasonry or any of the Rosicrucians or various secret societies as being, the hidden hand that controls that. And I was just letting people know, actually, there's a hidden hand above them as well that controls all of that. So part of what I was tasked with, or what I was taught about, was how all of that works, how all of these different things work together to, influence or feed the top of the pyramid. So as an example, there would be like an Illuminati member in every organization, like in the CIA and the FBI, in the American government, the Canadian government, in the Chinese government, in all over the world. They would just have, members that were in positions of power in all of that also know about this higher level of the pyramid. And so that's how they compartmentalize the information. So you could have someone like, pick a president, not even directly interacting with what we call the Illuminati. They would just have a handler who would then tell them what the Illuminati wanted them to know, and it would trickle down that way. So
because they want to control the information.
Exactly. And it's all very compartmentalized, so that, and I think most people have the perception that someone like the president knows everything about the in and outs of America, but they really don't, right? And again, like even the military doesn't know everything. The CIA doesn't know everything. The CIA will openly admit that they don't know everything, right? So our conception of how that has all worked has been inaccurate. And even now that we're starting to put it together through internet, because of the internet, we can research this, we can communicate with each other. We're still blind to this extra spot, which is, kind of what a lot of people have talked about. I think, most people who experienced these cults, programs, and projects at some level knew about or understood. And obviously it's fed into our mythology and our religions and everything else, that there is something off of this planet that has had influence on us, in whether it's genetic creation of us or just steering the game, so to speak, to benefit them.
Right. Like, I'm not into politics, but I know that the presidency is not an individual, it's an institution, and that the president is just the face. So when certain policies are passed, it's not the president himself that's passing those policies. He's just the person that you see signing the papers. But you had mentioned David Icke earlier, and a lot of what you're saying is very similar to what he's saying, particularly the reptilian slash Dracos or Dracos, which from years of being into the ufology field and studying it and reading articles, they're from a system called the Draco system. Is that correct, or am I off on that? Or are they from somewhere else?
They're not actually from there, even though the name makes sense, right?
Right.
But they do have like a base of operations there, which is why a lot of people connect the dots and beyond the name. But the where of that is kind of irrelevant. People like David Icke have been talking to people like me, right? Like if you listen to what they say, they talk about how they have insiders, right? And I was one of those insiders long before I ever did a public disclosure. Not just for people in the alternative community either. Like I was part of an organization that used to talk to Chris Carter for the X-Files, as an example.
Okay, so wait, hold on. Because I remember there was a story. I don't know that many people know about this. And he had told a story to somebody else that he was at a party. This is before he wrote the X-Files, and he was having an idea of writing some sort of a script for a show about aliens, but not have anything to do with X-Files, and that he got approached by an individual that told him essentially the future. You're going to write this story about this, blah, 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 this series. And then that person became a contact for him to feed him stories that wound up becoming episodes. Yeah. So were you one of these individuals?
Yeah, like there would be group calls.
Right.
Not to name David Icke specifically, but I'm sure that he's had other influences like that. I remember having a conversation with Professor Griff from Public Enemy, where he was talking about how while he was in Public Enemy, people would come to him with like dossiers of information that was occulted, right? And then he would write that into the raps and stuff. It actually ended up being kind of the ending of his career, but that's his story. But yeah, this has been going on all along, with the Alex Joneses and the David Icks and all of them. They have people like me who would talk to them and give them information. And a lot of the time, I mean, even with disinformation, there's always truth to it, right? So what we were doing is just telling them the truth, and then they go write it into their books and whatnot, and then they kind of take the heat. And from the Illuminati's viewpoint, that's them telling people the truth, right? They can write it into fiction. Nobody believes it. They can give it to someone like a David Icke or an Alex Jones, and because they're, triggering to different people for different reasons, nobody really listens to it, but they did tell you, right? So it's an old magician trick of closing the circle, right? It's like every illusionist will tell you exactly what they're going to do before they do it, and after they've done it, they'll tell you not how they did it, but why they did it, usually, right? So that's part of why they do all of that. And yeah, for a long time, it was part of my getting out of the Illuminati. Once they finally kind of brokered a deal with me to get out, one of the things I had to do was work for this organization that was very much like the X-Files. What we would do, is collect paranormal events, right? We would go to haunted houses. We would go to exorcisms. We would go to, I spent a whole year interviewing people who had been abducted by aliens, as an example.
And what was the reason for that? Why would they want to know these things?
Well, first of all, like we saw the X-Files through the TV show, but that system actually does exist. The difference is like what they showed you in that show was that the FBI has all of this, the X-Files, which are just unsolved cases, right? That are all of their unsolved cases. That is true. But you've also got the CIA who has their X-Files, and you've also got the Mossad who has their X-Files. So long before I ever got involved with that, and long before the TV show was ever made, all of those organizations started talking to each other, and they shared together into like a collective X-Files, if you will. So like, let's say I went out and we attended an exorcism. We would make a detailed report of everything. We would record it in various ways, and then that report would be shared with all of the intelligence agencies. Right. That way, if like something came up, they had a bunch of reports. So that's really the divergence from the TV show. But the rest of the concept of that is actually true, that they have this database of all these unsolved cases that involve paranormal stuff that they do investigate. And they do have teams that do investigate, and teams who go out and collect that information. Right. And as an example, they brokered this deal with me when I wanted to get out, that if I did this for them for a certain amount of time, they would, consider that payment, and they would, there's a bunch of other stuff involved, but they would let me go. And when it was told to me, it was told that they wanted to collect all this information so that they could start a re-education program for schools, basically letting all of the kids in school know that, you know, ghosts do exist, and, you know, all these things, all these paranormal things are actually real and measurable by science, and that some people do have some type of understanding of all of this, and, you know, put that into the education system so that we could all know. Now, from my perspective, that sounded great. I get to get out and I get to tell people the truth. All I got to do is spend X amount of years living two lives and doing this job where I do this thing. And so I did it. And at the end of it, they kind of took, you know, the X-Files, if you will, and just put them in, you know, the proverbial basement. And you're not allowed access to them anymore. They closed all the sci-files across all intelligence agencies in terms of that database. And that was it. So it was basically us collecting all the truth so that they could bury it.
Okay, so let's go back to like you going to, let's say, an exorcism, right? There's two outcomes to an exorcism. It's either successful or it's not successful. So in the end, what does that information benefit these groups, Mossad or any, what do they get from that? What let's say specifically an exorcism, what can they get from that? What are they using that information for?
There was a recent podcast on Lex Friedman where he's talking to a CIA agent, and the CIA agent, they even said the CIA has programs that examine paranormal, psychic stuff. I forget the way he said it, etheric information. And yeah, that's the aspects of the soul, life beyond death, you know, the truth of consciousness, all of that, it all falls under that. These people don't, the top of the pyramid people would understand this stuff, but the layers below that, they're still trying to figure it out. And so that was it. Trying to understand the mechanism of something like an exorcism, what's going on there, determines whether or not there's truth to it all, right? Like, is it just something that's going on in this child's mind, or is there an actual entity there that's possessing that body? Because that's, you know, for mainstream science, that alternative of that there is another entity there possessing that body doesn't seem real, right? And if it is real, then how do we quantify that? How do we measure it? How do we break it down? What are the dynamics? How does it all work? All of that sort of stuff is their question. So that's why they want the information, right? So that they can basically weaponize it against us. And then, so what the Illuminati have is a very deep level of all of that. And that's what I call the programs. So what the programs were like, you know, very well hidden collection of kids like myself, where they would test us through all of our different psychic abilities, just generally put it under one word, test our magic, right? And quantify it and record it and figure out how it all works. And what it ultimately led to was them being able to mimic everything through technology. You know, like take astral projection. They can mimic the astral experience through technology now because they understand how well astral possession or projection works. They understand how astral projection works very well. And so they were able to duplicate that with a technology to give you the experience that would be just like it or mimic the experience of what it's like, but also like test its boundaries, use it for various applications and all of that type of stuff. And yeah, there's a bunch of spirals for that are now in the kind of field you're podcasting in, right? The secret space program, super soldiers, all of that different stuff all comes from those programs. And it's not necessarily that they were creating super soldiers, but they were trying to test, you know, human potential's limits. They were trying to see how far we could be pushed, right, through these programs. And then there's also a lot of simulation involved, meaning, you know, simulating an experience so that we don't actually go through the experience, but making it seem like we go through an experience, not indifferent sometimes in a physical sense to like a crisis actor type situation, which like I've done through like regular mainstream work. I've done DHS training, Department of Homeland Security, anti-terrorist training, and they would actually stage like a building or in my case, it was a train platform with a bunch of actors that are just acting like regular people, as if, you know, this is just a train platform and everything's normal, right? And if you were to just walk into that not knowing that it was a simulation, you would just think this was regular, activity. You wouldn't have any reason to question it. So that's an example of what I mean when I say simulation. So there's physical simulations that are run something like that. As an example, take a bunch of people, build something underground that looks like a city, bring a bunch of people down there, create some type of catastrophe or problem or whatever event, and then watch what people did, right? And record it all. That's not practical, because what do you do with all those humans once you're done with it? So they do have incredibly advanced technology in these projects, and one of the ways that they can do that is by running us through a virtual simulation, and they do that with while we're in a hypnotic state or a heightened sense of, or a state of suggestibility, and then when we process that memory, we think that it actually happened to us. So you'll hear things like people having like a 20 and back program, right? And so what that means in truth is they've been run through a simulation that made them believe that their life went on for 20 years. And then they got woken up from that simulation and it was still that day, right? So it feels like they went 20 and back, but they didn't actually go 20 and back, right? Clearly, if the elites had that technology, they'd be using it, which they're also quite clearly not. They're all in dying, decrepit old bodies right now, right? So, as I say, proof is in the result. That's an example of a simulation.
That's crazy, man. Wow. All right. So you got me lost because I don't know what to ask.
I got myself lost. I always do. It's hard to stay in one direction.
Because there's so much going on. So let's go back to when you first started and you had that family member take you and you would go to your aunt's house. Like, what would happen after? Do you know? Okay, because I know there's certain things you can't talk about. If you can talk about where you were taken, and if you can't tell me like specifically where you were taken, like describe the place that you were taken, like inside of a mountain or something, like some sort of facility inside of them, like, and then what was the like, how did they introduce you to all these things? Like, you must have been like a kid, like, what am I doing in this place? Like, what was their approach to you? Was it aggressive, like you're gonna be doing this, or were they like acting like your friends and like, hey, your family, look, we're gonna test you on these cool things? Like, how was the whole process?
Well, it was very, get picked up, get taken somewhere, and that somewhere isn't where you think you are. There's a lot of them, and different entry points work differently. You mentioned mountains, like that's one example. The military does this. Even you can see like they have a side that looks like the mountainside, and then when you approach it, you can move it and enter.
Right. When I was in the Air Force, I was at Nellis, okay, from 98 to 02. And we weren't obviously allowed to openly speak about crazy stuff like that. The military wasn't really big on that. But, whenever you were on patrol with somebody, like I was a cop. So whenever I was on a patrol and I felt like I could trust that person, I would have conversations with them. And there were stories of roads that led up. You could see tire tracks that would lead up to a mountainside, and that would be it. It would just dead end there. And there was rumor that mountain is a mountain there, that it was hollowed out and there was a secret military base in there. So, so
and
you're talking about
things
like
underground too, where you drive up and there's like, it kind of just looks like flat ground, and then you hit a button and the ground moves out of the way, and now it's a ramp you can drive down into, right? And then another example, the one example that I give a lot of time, like, while I was living in Toronto, one place I would go to, I get picked up, we would go to this place, it was a bank, and we could walk straight through the bank and nobody would question us because the bank manager knew not to question us, right? And so they would trickle it down to all the employees. There was never a reason given to them why. Maybe they believed the person I was with owned the bank, and so they were free to come and go as they wanted to. And then you go into a room that is part of the bank, but that room is actually an elevator that'll bring you down, right? And nobody really understands that, right? Like, or nobody, unless you have access to that room, you would never know. The very first place that I was taken, the one that I did kind of get in trouble for publicly mentioning, was Marineland. Subsequently, since I wrote the blog, they had a big, huge public campaign run against them and are now closed. Hilarious.
Where's Marineland?
Marineland is like Niagara Falls, Canada. So it's basically like a SeaWorld amusement park type thing. SeaWorld. Yeah, they keep like killer whales, stuff like that there. So when I was a kid, I loved whales. And so I was brought there, and I was brought into this back room where I could interact with the whale directly. And then I was brought to another back room, which, just like I mentioned, had a floor that was not a floor, it was the bottom for an elevator. And we went down into what was an underground base, no longer underneath there anymore. That's part of the closing of it. And part of the thing I got in trouble for was actually saying that, because they're like, fuck, now we have to close that place and get rid of it. But yeah, that's kind of an example of how it would start too. And a lot of public amusement parks have been used in that way, or they're built on top of stadiums, things that are you could have traffic through and nobody would question, right? Like the bank example I gave you, like that's an example. Imagine like a football field in the US, right? Like nobody knows who you are, nobody knows why you have access to this one door that even security doesn't have a key for, right? And then you go into that room and it is an elevator, it has some type of access to it. So it's it's really easy to pull off. Where I live now, they built a whole establishment, buried it, and then put a plaza on top of it as an example, right?
So, yeah, I suspect Disney, like especially here where I live in Florida, I suspect there's, because Walt Disney himself was involved in some things that people don't even know about. But
we know that they did from World War II, right? Like that's why they were using that altering World War II. So we know for a fact that there's underground structures under Walt Disney. What they're used for when it wasn't World War II, nobody seems to want to ask. But yeah.
All right. So you say the Illuminati have this name called the Parents, right? Or the Parents are a subsection, I guess, of the Illuminati.
They're more or less the top of the pyramid, right? Like just below the Draco. Like the whole system, the whole pyramid, I view as the Draco's pyramid, right? So we can kind of almost separate them. They're up here, and then you've got the pyramid, and then it would go Parents, their covens, and then the secret societies, and then the world establishments, all the intelligence agencies, governments, all that stuff.
All right. So it would be safe to say that they had their hands in like different sections. For instance, paranormal, economics, politics. Like, how does that all work?
Well, all you need is like, just imagine a law firm. One of those lawyers is usually a partnership, right? It's usually two. One of them is a member, right? So they can very easily influence the other one if they need to. If you imagine a corporation, 1, 2, maybe 3 of the people who work for that corporation are members, and they can easily influence the way the corporation goes. Think of the military. Get someone who's nice and loyal and make them a general of something, make them a this of something. They can compartmentalize the information that way. It's like a need to know thing. And if you don't need to know, you don't get to find out, but that person would need to know so that they could keep that kind of as a secret. And they got away with this for so long because there was no real communication. Like you gave an example of what the communication used to be like, of like, you're talking to your partner, they're telling you a story. You've got no type of way of verifying their story, right? You just kind of got to feel it out. And until we had the internet, everything was like that, right? Like I could literally take you somewhere, show you something, and what are you going to do with that information? Running around telling everybody that I took you out and showed you a UFO. And then what happens if I say, no, I didn't, he was drunk? Well, I don't even know what he's talking about, right? So the internet has made that all a lot harder, but they created the internet, so they knew it was coming. And that's a lot of why they broke down the programs, projects, and cults leading up to this and started to break them down. And this is a lot of why we get away with talking about them now, because there's nothing we can really point to that would get them in trouble anymore.
Right. So you mentioned, like, an example, you taking me out and showing me a UFO, which is very similar to what Bob Lazar did. What do you know about that situation? Were you connected in any way with that, or did you hear did you get any information from the parents concerning Bob Lazar?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the military operates at its own level, and a lot of these different groups think that they're the top of the pyramid, right? Which is the most hilarious part. I think the most trouble I got into because of the blog was all of the people who thought they were in the top of the pyramid,
right,
who were very upset with me for saying that someone else was the top of the pyramid as an example. So yeah, like the military would have something like a recovered UFO, and they would have their own way, like their own compartments to deal with that. And then they would just have the Illuminati would have a member who was in that compartment, right? And a lot of what they've been trying to do, when it comes to space and space travel and ETs and all of that is misdirect us through misinformation. So they push a lot of bullshit, and it's commonly held as normal, especially in our community, knowing that it'll keep us away from the truth, right? The more we're all talking about these space wars going on in the atmosphere that we just can't see, the less people ever take it seriously, right? So there's an aspect of it to that. Even with maybe something more specific like abductions, like UFO abductions, there are some that the military are not aware of, right? That it was some off-world species who did it. And then there's a lot of them, if not the majority of them, that are performed by the military so that the public will talk about alien abductions. Part of my role when I was talking about that full year I did of interviewing people was to try and separate those two stories, which ones were actually abducted by the military in a stage simulated event that made them think they were, abducted by aliens, and which one of them might have actually been contacted by something the government, the military, that organization isn't aware of.
Right. So in your estimation, and from, your knowledge of things, how many alien races are here on this planet that have visited, are visiting? There's been rumors that there's a lot, but I would imagine maybe there's not that many.
Not these days. I mean, the planet has been home to many different forms of life. We're kind of at a point now because of the way that this is all broken down and played out that so there's a couple of subterranean species that do share the planet with us. Some that live underwater, some that live underground, and they're their own species. They have their own civilization. They just share this planet with us, and they were at one point in time ETs, not from here.
But they're you saying currently?
Currently, yes.
Oh, okay.
And they do their own thing. They're not really involved with us. It's been that way for a long time, hundreds of thousands of years. Various groups. It's really hard to generalize any of this stuff because, just as different as, where you grew up is from where I grew up, imagine the difference of it on another planet. And then even a type of generalization people will make it be like, I was in touch with Pleiadians. Okay, the Pleiades is like what, 6 or 7 stars? Right, we have one star and we have this many planets, right? So that's a very vague statement to say a Pleiadian, right? It's like that'd be the equivalent of saying a Milky Wayian, right, or a Solarian, right? It doesn't say anything. We can see on Earth, we've got Chinese, we've got Mexican, we've got various whites, various blacks, various everything, right? So it's not something we can generalize like that. So a lot of different moving parts, basically, is what I'm getting at. Our governments, in terms of like the regular government and the military at that level, they're probably aware about 4 or 5 different species.
And do you know who they are?
That they've had interaction with. One of them would be Draco, right?
Okay.
The rest, I mean, there's names that I've seen the alternative community use, and then there's names that are really their name. So I don't know, we kind of play the difference, and I can't categorize all of them, but there's they call them the Zeta
Reticuli.
Reticuli, that's the word I was looking for. That is a group that has a different name, but like the image that you guys are associating with that name is a group. Arcturian is another one that is actually an accurate name. It was kind of disclosed through fiction. Actually, it was in the movie Jupiter Ascending, a group called Abraxas. That is another one that they were aware of, and is related to that other part of the solar system we call Nibiru Planet X.
The Anunnaki, is that this? Because okay, so this is where I get confused. I know, and I know why you're laughing. Because there's a lot of confusion out there. You have this. I got introduced through Zacharias Sitchin and his writings. Now, when he first came out, and when I first started noticing his writings and everything, this was like in the 90s when the internet was blowing up, and you go on every UFO page and they would have all this stuff. And Zachariah was like the standard for what is it? What's that text? That Sumerian text, right? And but now lately, people are like essentially like shitting on him and saying that his translations were wrong. So I don't know what's real and what's not. if Anunnaki were really like this race that created us supposedly, and they came down and now they left. You have the whole Chariots of the God and Eric Van Doniken and Giorgio Tsoukalos, and they're talking about this stuff. Like, it's hard to tell what's real and what's not real. You know what I mean?
But even if, let's just either interpretation, Sitchin's or everyone else's, either way, Anunnaki does not mean the name of the group that did it, right? Like, either way, the word Anunnaki simply means the equivalent of alien, those who from the sky came, right?
Correct.
Came from the sky. That's what it means. So to say that they're a race is just incorrect, right?
Right, because any race could have come down, and then they're considered Anunnaki by default.
Right. And the Anunnaki, right, those who came from the sky, didn't want their images to be saved, and they didn't want their name to be repeated in both interpretations of the text. So that would tell you that we wouldn't know through those texts what they were actually called or what they actually looked like. And we can also interpret from hearing that from both of those texts that anything they did allow in terms of drawings of themselves would be incorrect. And why does it not make sense that they would just go with something that was a bigger version of us? Because that size difference is, symbolic of a god, right? Something bigger than you, right? So that's all the images really mean, is just that we had this off-world species who was teaching us stuff or doing this direction of us, the genetic manipulation, all of that. So even just breaking it down with a simple logic, there is no Anunnaki, right? Like, the Anunnaki just means anything that's ever visited here.
It's just a label.
What the story refers to, as do all of our mythologies and religions, all tell the Draco story. The idea of, and even the name there, because their king, if you will, like Great White King, he's often called here the Reptilian King. His name is Anu, right? So it's Anunnaki, all of that, right? He's very vain thing that loves his image being into things just enough that we would never actually know. But so that story, if you listen to it, that structure of like the father and the two sons is literally in every mythos and religion. And that's where it all ties back to, is those names from Sumerian were put out correctly: Anu, Enki, and Enlil. And of course, based on that, we get Anunnaki because it just fits with the language style and the word that we did have used. So the basic premise of it tells you the story of them coming down and genetically manipulating a type of species that was here, like a humanoid species that was already here, into us. And yeah, that's kind of where it starts.
Oh, that's crazy. Okay, so all right, so that's some clarification there. All right, so let's get into some of the myths, right, that I'm pretty sure you've heard about the Illuminati. What have some of the things that you've heard that you laugh at and you're like, that shit's not true, because you have cartoons now. I mean, Illuminati's like such a joke now. Like when back in the days it was something somewhat serious. Not many people talked about it. Now it's like on video games, you have cartoons on Netflix that talk about the Illuminati. It's a joke now. But what are some of the myths?
That on purpose, right? Like, they've been doing this all along. Is basically, even if someone were to come along and start telling some method of truth, they would send someone along to gain the confidence of them and give them a bunch of more truth that was just like a fantastic version of what they know as truth, right? So, taking something small and making it very big, but making that very big thing absurd, right, to the regular people. A very recent example of how they've done this is QAnon, right? So you've got QAnon broadcasting anonymously, putting out these little drops. Some of them are very much rooted in truth, but it also led Q followers into all sorts of nonsense. Pizzagate, another example, right? Put out a bunch of stuff that is quite clearly bullshit and just makes it sound crazy, and it hides the truth, right? Because everybody, the average person, like the Joe Rogans of the world, will just see the end result, right? They lose where that started from. Had a similar example that I've been using as a example of how this works the other day. I was getting French fries. There's a group of people there. Some guy starts talking to me about the financial system and how it's all rigged and people should be buying silver. And that translates into some stuff about, I call it the joy, that virus thing that was just going around. And what he's saying is all making sense and everyone's listening, right? Everyone's like, okay. And then he goes, you want to know why all this is happening? Well, this is because Putin is really invading Ukraine to get a bunch of kids out of dumps. He's rescued about 30,000 kids from dumps. And you just see everyone go, right? And that's how it works. And we do the same thing. QAnon did the same thing. We blew Pizzagate up into the same thing. Adrenochrome. Right, we've taken that and turned it into this shot that celebrities get, and they're all getting sick because they're not getting their adrenochrome. No, but adrenochrome exists, and they use it, but not like that, right? And because the public gets this version, the truth is over here. This public version is just so crazy sounding, like the secret space program, our version of that, right? Like, oh, there's all these different fleets and they're all these different groups and they're all at war with each other every day and they have all these missions on the planet and they're trying to put us into alternate dimensions. And that takes away from the truth, right? It makes the water so dirty that you can't see through it anymore, and most people just check out. And the Joe Rogans have that fuel to go, those motherfuckers are crazy. Sorry about my language, but
go ahead, go for it.
That's exactly what he would say, right?
Yeah.
And you can actually see, and I'm using him as an example for that reason, because they use him that way, right?
He's a tool, yes.
He's a tool to do that, to show people why what we're talking about is absurd, because it is absurd, right? And the only difference is he's not preserving any of the truth that's in it, because he's just pointing out the absurdity. And it works very well. And unfortunately, we kind of do it to ourselves in a lot of ways, right? Like people, and the way that I think that this happens is, I know that there are a lot of kids, like I used to walk through rooms with tens of thousands of people hooked up to computers and shit all in one place. And that's a lot of fucking people. That's a football stadium worth of people, right? So like, to see that many people all getting programmed at one time, in one place, on one day, in 1 hour. Just imagine how much of that was actually going on, because we've got Russia, we've got China, we've got Korea, we've got India, we've got, all of South America. Like, I'm just in Canada, right? So it's like the amount of people who would have been through these things. And because our memories probably can't tell the difference between what was real and what was not if we were not conscious for it, right? Like, I've been through these simulations and I know that they were simulations because I went into it. It's like putting on a headset to play a video game, right? I wasn't drugged up and I wasn't unconscious and I wasn't hooked up to these things beyond my will or beyond my understanding. If I was, then yeah, maybe I would believe that I played Ender's Game in real life. Right. Or maybe I would believe that I've been through a zombie apocalypse and I survived it and they just reversed the timelines and put us on a different timeline. So that didn't happen. Maybe I would believe those things, but I've gone through those things, like a zombie apocalypse, like playing Ender's Game in a simulation consciously. So I do know the difference. And like I said, because I've seen like literal fields full of people going through that without the awareness that I have, it makes sense to me why that has worked against us in this particular community, because people have memories that are in their memory, right? Like were put there, but they can't, like, what's the difference? I can't tell the difference between the memories, even though I know one was real and one was not. They feel real, right? So you take a person like that who is completely on, and then you put them on the internet where someone's talking about the secret space program and the cloning facilities and this and that and this and that. And what they do is they recall their memory and they implant this other person's story on top of their memory. And suddenly they're a super soldier. They were in the secret space program. They were this, as opposed to, we've all just been deceived. And it's basically been all leading us to what we see now in the public, which is this rise of virtual world, right? The rise of the metaverse and virtual reality. And we know exactly where that's going. It's right here in front of our face. The majority of the public can't wait to get that VR set, right? And I did a series that I called The Machine, where I spoke about us being in this type of machine matrix type reality. And a lot of people didn't like that idea, and understandably so. But I mean, just look at all the technology that's available to us right now. All you have to do is collect it all and bring it all together, and you have a machine that could run a matrix. It's all already out there. They just haven't started connecting them to each other yet. There are pods you can go in. They're calling them suicide pods right now, but they completely put you into a stasis before they kill you, right?
Really?
Yeah.
And
And
where's this happening?
Sweden, I believe. I believe
What?
they're using them in Sweden because they have assisted euthanasia there. So that they've got that technology. That's the pod from the Matrix, right? They've got the psychedelic community looking for ways to make people more suggestible, but also kind of pacify the body so that they can stay in a DMT state or a mushroom state or whatever that is, without trying to sit up or get up or do their thing, or, you know what I mean, react physically to what's going on, kind of like how the brain shuts our mobile sensors off when we dream so that we're not flailing in our sleep, right?
Right.
Basically looking for that on and off switch for that too. Well, put that onto VR technology as well. And once again, you have the Matrix, right? And then make the VR indistinguishable from reality. I've already used VR simulations that can make you believe there's tension on the bow as you're pulling it back, just because of like how much it's convincing your brain. And all the neuroscientists are telling us about all these different little bits of technology. Once again, treat it like it's Transformers, put all those things together, and you have the Matrix. So it's not like I'm saying anything that's crazy. I'm pointing to things that actually
Right.
exist and saying, just put them together.
Right.
Break
Right.
the left hand and the right hand and go like this, and you've got something that claps now, right? So,
Right.
yeah, and that's kind of the difference. And I always use the phrase, proof is in the result when we're talking about these things. With the secret space program as an example, if they're capable of doing that, then why aren't they? Why are they doubling down on being here? Why are they doubling down on trying to control this population? Why are they still doing the climate change thing? Why are they still messing with the environment here if they can just disappear?
Right.
What's the point? Why? Just let us all die, right? Let it go. Would you do that? No, probably not. So why would they? They're not dumb people, right? And so logically, none of that makes sense. What does make sense is that all of that was simulations meant to make you think that, so that you don't actually do anything. It's called a stand down program, so that, you know, they can pull off stuff like what they've done over the last 2 years of completely locking down a society and gaslighting a society and redefining words and completely manufacturing reality for us, right? So once again, you can see the proof in the result.
So they've essentially have all these different puzzle pieces. We don't know how to put them. We haven't put them together yet. They just threw them out there, and eventually we will eventually put them together and pretty much create our own demise.
Yeah.
They're not going to do it for us. They're just like, okay, here are the tools. Create something that you're going to destroy yourself. So we're not to blame for it. We're just introducing you to these different, technologies or whatever. Is that what's happening essentially?
Yeah, like even when I wrote the blog and I got in trouble for it, like I remember someone from their side explaining to me how like it was a bigger problem with me because they knew they couldn't convince me into doing something like that, right? Like they actually did try to get me on Gaia TV talking about the secret space program through a proxy just before I actually did become known publicly for the blog. So
Right.
that was one of their ways of trying to make me get into fantasy land and stop keeping things in logic and truth, so that I could be discredited that way. And now it's because I don't play with everyone's fantasies that they know my audience would only ever be so big, right? Like it's never going to be David Icke size where I'm like touring the world in front of stadiums or anything like that, because there's enough truth in what I'm saying that makes it not as sexy, if you know what I mean.
I know what you're saying. Yeah. You're not making it more fantastical than what it really is.
Exactly.
And people are drawn to that fantastical thing. So I wasn't going to bring it up yet, but like to me, like individuals like Stephen Greer, David Wilcox, Corey Good, even Emery Smith, these guys, when they first came on the scene, I mean, I was like, wow, all right, cool. They're talking about some really serious shit here. But then after a while, man, I started to like wonder, like, are they being truthful? Like, is there an agenda that they're trying to follow? And then, like, I don't know if you know who Jimmy Church is. He has a show, Fade to Black. He had like Wilcox and he had Good and Emery Smith on. And all of a sudden they weren't on his show anymore. And he would have even like his fans would like send messages or call in on the show and ask him questions about them. He doesn't even want to talk about them. So I knew something was up. I knew something was up with them. So are they agents of disinformation in your opinion?
No, that's an example of us doing it to ourselves. Corey was just a dude who was on Project Avalon for a really long time. I think he might have
Legitimately,
had,
was he? Was he
yeah.
really like in that project?
Project Avalon is a online forum for conspiracy theories. It's not a real project. It's Bill Ryan used to be partners with Kerry Cassidy on Project Camelot, right? Bill Ryan, they separated, and Bill Ryan started a forum called Project Avalon, and it's for people like you, right, to go on and discuss these ideas. And so Corey was a member there for years. He might have had some type of programmed memory. I don't actually believe he did, but he might have, and that might have been where this started. But he basically just did what any one of the people listening to me right now could do, is study the community, gather the information, turn that into a story, and then tell the story, right? Get the spotlight and then move forward. And because he had David Wilcock behind him, it made it extra potent. So, I mean, it's pretty well known publicly now, so I have no problem saying it. That's the researcher that I was talking about earlier. And like, because I was already talking to David Wilcock before all of that.
Right.
David had asked me to do cosmic disclosure, and I had said no. He his exact words to me one day were, "I've got all I can get out of Corey. I would rather focus on you and your story because I know it's more real." And I didn't do it. And then a few days later, there were the sphere beings and the blue avians and all of that stuff. And of course, I wasn't having it because it was clearly nonsense, and I'm an honest person, so when asked about it, I told the truth. No, none of that stuff was real. Corey basically read the law of one, took all of this information, knew that would get in David Wilcox's head. David Wilcox had a financial incentive to need to do this series, and so he used what was available to him. And so they split at the end of it too, for the same reason, that it was always a made-up story, right? And so, I mean, yes, that's, kind of puts David in the same bad light, but it's not like he made up a story. He was just kind of feeding Corey that stuff.
He was riding the train.
Yeah.
He was riding the train, that's all.
And then what they ended up doing was just taking all of David's knowledge, and David is brilliant. Like he like I said, he was talking to me before, like I was one of his insiders, right? He was doing conferences based on stuff I had said to him privately, right? So I know that he's got a lot of information, and a lot of it is good information. And yeah, so he basically gave Corey, helped Corey fill in the spots that he couldn't. And that's why now you can see, once again, proof in the result. Now that they're not together, Corey can't maintain his story anymore, right? He's screwing up the details. He's gone a little bit crazy. And all the people who got to know them behind the scenes tell us the truth about what they're really like character-wise, right? Or what he really like character-wise, right? So, and that's the other thing about people who've been through what I've been through. We don't come out of that and be that unstable of characters, right? Like, we're taught how to handle ourselves a lot better than that. And so, proof in the result, once again.
And what about Stephen Greer? Is the whole CE5 movement?
I think for him, it was just a matter of like him legitimately getting into that field of research and being excited and excitable, right? And when someone's excited and excitable, and they have that, what Mulder would call want to believe, right? They're very easy to manipulate and feed them full of information, and even show them things with technology that exists that would convince them of whatnot. I think even Bob Lazar's story has elements to that. And to Bob Lazar's credit, I think he realizes that his story has elements of that, because I've heard him say it, that like what he saw, they might have wanted him to see.
I agree.
Right. So
yeah, he has said that. Yeah. Because he said that there was this memory he has when he was at S4 and he's walking through the hallways, and he happened to just really quickly look into this room that had it had a little like a glass, on the door where you can see inside. And he said he could have sworn he saw a little being in there. but he
Yeah,
thinks
that
that
would be something
that
like that, right? Like
yeah,
I've seen them do stuff like that. I've seen them set things like that up. I've heard why. Like that's the thing. My upbringing through them was meant to be a pretty high level, so they were explaining these things to me as it went. Like I still went to public school and was actually taught the differences between the two education systems directly, between what they were teaching me and
right.
then what they teach the public. They're like, we're teaching you this because it's the truth, and we're teaching them this because it's not. And you can see how our group, our structure goes in this direction, and their structure, their group goes
Right.
in that direction, right? So they've split society in that way.
And is
For a
it
really
and
long
is it
time.
a divide and conquer? Is that what it is? Like a divide and conquer sort of strategy?
More or less, yeah. Just how they maintain the control, right? It's how they maintain the power.
Now you had mentioned in one of your shows that you were probably one of the first kids to mess with an iPad, but like
Well, yeah.
in the 80s, like can you talk about that?
Well, that was that same first experience where I was introduced to my what would become my first handler. When they first brought me down in that elevator, they had brought me into a little room and they were going to talk to somebody, and so
What
they
year?
handed
Do you
me
mind telling me what year? Like around what year?
1984.
Okay, wow. Yeah.
So, and then they handed me what is, I didn't know at the time, but what is an iPad, basically, a tablet, um, to entertain me. Basically, it had a little video game on it for me to play, and I I don't know how long I spent, but I spent whatever
Right.
waiting time I had to spend occupied by this advanced technology that yeah, I didn't get to see again in the public until way later in my life, which was always funny to me.
Right. So it was like a one-time thing they handed to you like one time, or was it like
Well, no, I
something?
was always around technology like that. It
Right.
just I didn't. It wasn't until I started to get older that I started to understand the difference, right? Like I think I would have been like around 6 or 7 the first time I asked the questions, like, how come I don't have a TV like this at my house? Right?
Oh,
How come I
because
can't
they probably have flat screens and back then.
a lot of projection technology,
Right.
right? A lot of their stuff was like projected on into space, like holographic, right? And like I was like, how come this? Like I can't go to the store and buy this, right? Like subsequently, my regular life, I had a stepdad who loved stereo systems, so he was always like buying the newest, best stereo he could find. And then I was like around the like surround sound was common to me long before I ever heard it in a theater, as an example.
Wow, that's crazy, man. All right. So you're known as the ruiner. Why are you known as the ruiner?
It was
Was that given to you, that name, or you that's the name you gave yourself?
we're often left with the names given to us by our enemies. It was one of my handlers used to call me that all the time, and I think the reason why I kind of went with it when I wrote the blog was a little bit of a stab at her in a way. Like I kind of reclaimed that name because she would use it to me in a very derogatory way.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so that's really all it's about. It was I I wanted to maintain a certain level of fictional quality with the blog, right? So I kind of wrote it through a character that I called the Ruiner, and that way I can put the disclaimer on it that it's fiction, and you know my kids don't have to deal with it, and my family doesn't have to deal with it. And I've even had, like I was talking about that security job. Obviously, they would do a lot of checking into me throughout my employment with them because I'm dealing with um, everything from A-list celebrities and athletes to like prime ministers and presidents of other countries and whatnot. So they were always checking my clearance, and that was one thing that would always come up. Actually, was that the other thing, my education record, because when they would check into my education record, they would have one transcript that says I dropped out of grade 10, and then they have a university degree from Brock University, and they're like, how did you get a university degree if you dropped out of high school? Right? It's like it's a question. And so one of those times they found the blog, right? And they were like, so what's this all about? And I was able to say, well, it's what it says at the bottom. It's a creative writing thing. And, you know, that was enough for them to not look into it any more deeply.
Right,
So.
right. All right. So you were part of this group that went out, and it was part of, I guess, your contract, right? In order for you to kind of step away from the Illuminati was, you know, to go on these explorations doing these X-Files type things. Did you ever come across like cryptids? Like what's your stance on cryptids, like Bigfoot and Dogman, since this is a kind of like a paranormal conversation?
Well, I've experienced Bigfoot both through them and aside from them, actually. Um, the aside from them story was actually pretty fun. That aunt's house, who I used to go to, on downtime, it was a big farmhouse. I've always been an outdoorsy person. There, across the street from them, there was this old retired cop who had like acres and acres of property, and he also had four-wheelers and four-wheeler trails that he had cut through his forests, and he would let me ride his four-wheelers and look around back on his property like that. And for years I was going there, and so this relationship went on for years. And a nice older man, we got close. He was like this, old man confidant, taught me stuff,
like a father figure,
something like that. Yeah. And his one rule right from day one was, there's a lake, never go the other side of the lake. The trail goes to this side of the lake. For whatever reason, do not go to the other side of the lake. I never really questioned that. I was just a kid, right? And it was just the rules, so I never really even thought to like why. I just thought he probably didn't have trails cut over there, so he didn't want me getting hurt or getting lost or whatever.
right?
But never really asked. And then eventually he was like, "Do you want to know why I told you can't go on the other side of the lake?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, of course." He's like, "Okay, well, come with me." And so he took me. And he took me to like kind of the in-between spot, like the main trail would have gone off this way, and that's the direction I'm not supposed to go. So we went around the lake a little bit there, and he's like, "Okay, now just sit. Well, we're just gonna be quiet." He's like, "Just don't talk." He's like, "When it's time, I'll let you know." I'm like, "Okay." But again, I'm pretty used to following instructions as a kid, so I did what he said. Sat for I don't know how long, and then he's like, he just points. And so I turned, and on the other side of the lake, you could see what was a very small family of Sasquatch. Got to look like what would have been a mother and father and two kids, basically doing things. What would have been the mother was doing something in the water, while the father was kind of watching us. Right?
Oh, so they knew you were there.
They knew we were there. Yeah. And I guess he had his father before him and his grandfather before that had owned that property. So it has just been in the same family and passed down and passed down. And his son, when he died, got the property and saw the quick money signs of, I'm going to contact someone and get them to come check out these Sasquatch that live on my property. Thinking, he would get a Discovery Channel thing, he would get all of that. And I happened to be there that day when the military, what looked like military, all pulled up, went in with guns in the forest, and came out with body bags.
Oh, wow. They killed the family?
They killed the family, and they got rid of the evidence. And what I know from the other side is that's how they've handled that for at least the last 50 years, is anytime they are reported and they find out about it. So be careful. If you guys have any on your property, don't fucking tell anybody, because you'll get those things killed. Let's put it that way. If they find out about them, they will kill them. They do have a lot in captivity as well, so I've interacted with them that way. And then a lot of the Draco.
What are they like? So you've interacted with them. What are they like? Are they descendants of us? Are they primates?
There are species that naturally evolved here. Like the idea of like Darwin's version of evolution, they're the pinnacle of that. So they're a naturally evolved creature for Earth. They're quite psychic, at least they would be in their natural environment. Because of the way that we kind of forced them out, we kind of forced them into tribes, if that makes sense. So like different tribes kind of remember different levels of their own past and have a kind of different lifestyle. Some of them live, very much like an animal living in the bush. Some of them actually have like little, almost like a civilization. I've even like bumped into some that'll actually shave hair.
Really?
Yeah, like groom themselves like we do. Yeah, and can talk similar to the way that we do. And then others that are just very primitive. So that varies actually, but basically, they're just a highly evolved version of a natural species on this planet. So they're quite psychic. Like they're very in tune with things. That's a lot of why they can avoid us, is because they know we're there long before we know they're there, right?
That's any animal really in the wilderness.
Yeah, and they're also very nocturnal. They prefer to come out at night. So that's another reason why we don't bump into them much, because they only come out at night. They're cannibalistic. They eat their dead. So
that's why we don't find their bones.
They use their own bones for tools. So Yeah.
That okay,
Um,
wow.
yeah. They're actually quite aware of the difference between us and them and keep themselves away from us. That's why there's a part of me that like kind of can get sucked in with things like Sasquatch Ontario, which is actually pretty close to me.
Right.
I don't actually know the guy, but I could get sucked into that pretty easy. I'm not, but I could, just because like I do know that they're kind of like that. Like they would, you know, if they trusted you, they would be okay showing themselves to you, right? And they'd be able to psychically read you to know if you could even handle seeing them. So like that does happen. So I do believe people when they say they've had these interactions with them, because I know what they're like. And they are like that. They're actually very gentle giants, you know, like
Right.
it's and I like there's a YouTuber called Thinker Thunker. Love
Yes.
him one day.
He's
And
awesome. Yes.
he calls them forest giants. I love that, and they would love that too. But yeah, I've interacted with them on both sides. They exist, and that's what they are.
Wow, that's crazy. So have you heard of the Sasquatch Chronicles? Wes Germer. He has a if you don't, I would look that up. I mean, his approach to it is genuine. It's more or less people calling in, telling their stories. He tries to interpret it the best way he can. He doesn't consider himself an expert, but a lot of what you were saying, he would agree with.
Yeah.
But he's never talked about them using their bone, like being cannibals and eating their own kind. Like nobody's ever really thought of that.
A lot of
But I'm
cannibalism on this planet that we don't talk about, but that's another whole conversation.
yeah, that's another.
But yeah, a lot of those creatures either did exist or still do, right? Like dogmen is another one that's like a
Yeah,
genetic manipulation. They have their own civilization. They've also learned to only come out at night. So that's why the time we spot them, it tends to be at night. That led to the werewolf myth of people turning into, you know, wolf-like creatures at night.
so werewolf is a myth based off of a dog off of the genetic
Yes,
manipulation.
genetic manipulation. Yeah. Um, Things like that. Another one like it's probably my favorite day that I ever had with them was getting to swim in a tank with what we would call the Loch Ness monster. Basically,
Really?
what they pulled out of that particular body of water, um, they have in a giant tank. They have a whole facility up here in Canada actually that is very much like. Have you ever seen the movie Cabin in the Woods?
Yes.
You know the like underground structure there.
Yeah, with all those
Like
little
all the
compartments and all that. Yeah, 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 yeah,
They
yeah.
have a
So
spot in British Columbia, Canada. It's not near any towns or anything. It's just
right.
underground in Columbia, Canada. That is full of them. That's where they keep them. So they store them there, keep them alive if they can. Sometimes they'll build them like a little environment to exist in
Right.
and start their own lives in if they
Like a
can.
habitat.
Yeah, and then some of them like you just kind of have to keep contained because they're very dangerous.
All right, so these okay, so you're talking about Loch Ness. So in your did they tell you if it was like a plesiosaur or is that a myth that it's or is it something
Dinosaurs
else?
in general are a myth. It's just giant lizard, a giant aquatic lizard that we used to have lots of them. We still do. There's some that they haven't quite caught yet.
Right.
And yeah, they're all over the planet.
And do they look like what people draw Loch Ness to be? Like this thing with a long neck that looks like like a plesiosaur.
Yeah,
Does it look
yeah,
like?
yeah. Well, yeah, and we've had like skeletons of them that we reconstruct and call dinosaurs for sure. It's the same thing with dragons. Like dragons were real, have been real. I think we last time we had them here was probably even as close as like 15,000 years ago. So we use those bones.
Fire breathing, you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, just like Game of Thrones. It was just real. I've just been rewatching Game of Thrones.
Right.
I kind of laugh, but yeah, that was a normal thing here up until we started killing them all off, or the Draco essentially started getting us and helped us kill them all off. And what we've done in order to cover up the fact that their bones are scattered all over the place is create dinosaurs. Giant animals, giant lizards specifically, are commonplace on this planet.
So are you alluding that dinosaurs aren't real or
Just the way that
there's a
they're
misconception?
Yeah, just a misconception. Like I said, giant lizards have occupied this planet for forever. Giant things, giants, are
Right.
like the topic of giants. We've had them. Man, we still have giants on this planet, right? So it's like they do still exist. The world's a really big place. Like I just had a American friend visit Canada and like note the fact that like there's an entire 12-hour stretch of Ontario where you see nothing but trees. you're basically just driving on a road that's driving through an interior forest. So that's an entire 12 hours worth of driving at 80 kilometers per hour, or like 60 or whatever it is there, where there's no people, no human beings.
Correct.
52% of Canada has not been explored by humans. Russia and China have bigger percentages than that. Right. I think a lot of the conspiracy world does come from the United States or England. And you guys are kind of these very overpopulated islands. Right. And you kind of forget the fact that the rest of the world is a lot bigger than you are. And
Well, that's the thing, though.
I'm not talking to you directly, Chris, but like, you know.
No, I understand. No, but what I'm saying is like the fact that America is overpopulated is not true. They just make it seem like it's true. There's something that I was listening to another podcast, and there's this comedian. He's an MMA guy named Eddie Bravo. I don't know if you know who he is, but
I do, yeah.
He had talked about and something that I think about all the time. It's funny, like when you think of things and you're like, "Oh, I'm crazy. I'm probably the only one that thinks of this." But then somebody else talks about it, like on a larger platform, and that is that when you're in a plane and you're flying, particularly here in America, and I've driven through America as well, because I mean, I drove from New York City here to Florida when we first moved from New York to Florida. And when I joined the military, I drove from Florida all the way across to the West Coast to Nevada. There's so much land and there's areas where you don't see people, but yet they want to make it seem like we're so overpopulated. Why? Because they push us into these big cities. That's why we feel like we're overpopulated. There's nothing better. There's nothing more that I want than to move to a secluded place. You know, so bad. I mean, unfortunately, my wife doesn't want to do it, but I would love to, because I feel like it's just too many people. But there's enough land on this planet. We're not overpopulated. You know, we could fit trillions and trillions of people if we wanted to.
So, and that ties into another way that they've like manipulated an agenda through our community with like the Georgia Guidestones and making us believe that they want to depopulate, right?
Correct.
Yeah. They don't plan on depopulating. They might change our genetics a little bit along the way. They might be trying to augment us, but they have no inclination to kill all of us off. My favorite part of this one, especially with the most recent, I call that thing the lollipop that they're giving people.
Right? Yes, I was going to ask you about that because I know it's very controversial. And I might get.
Let me just finish this point.
And go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I apologize.
People are using that as like evidence of depopulation. Well, just imagine yourself as being like the controller of this planet, and you've got 7 billion people. Do you want to kill off 5 billion people who will do what you say and leave 2 billion who wouldn't listen to you? Does that make any fucking sense to you? No, because you're still just one person and they're 2 billion. You're still screwed, right? So quite clearly that was never their agenda, right? Quite clearly that was not in the works. And what I know from having grown up and being raised to know what they think, like they want to double our population, not reduce it.
And what would
figure out the best way how?
And that would be what, to have more slaves, right? Double the population to have more lemmings. Essentially,
well, this is where the X-Files was right, or not the X-Files, where the Matrix was right, is because you know how they're trying to push an energy crisis?
Yes.
We're the solution to the energy crisis.
We're the batteries.
We're the batteries. We are a biomechanical system that creates bioelectricity and can be harnessed. DARPA already has pills that do that. And it's just, problem, reaction, solution. They're pushing the problem right now, getting the reaction. Eventually they'll offer the solution, which will be, hey, if you take this particular injection, you will be able to power your cell phone without having to plug it in. You'll be able to power your laptop. You can power your whole house without having to plug into anything, right? So we've, again, this community talks about free energy and free energy devices. We are free energy devices. And that's actually, it's not the first time that type of thing has been harnessed here. It doesn't even have to be in a malicious way. It's just a really good energy source. We create a lot of energy.
Right. So like I was going to say, like when the whole COVID thing went down and they called it a pandemic and all this stuff. And then now you have like these shots that you have to take and the booster shots. Is that their way of manipulating our genetics? Are they doing it through that nanotechnology in the shots?
So they really want to get us into augmenting ourselves, like cybernetics, right? Even with an organ donation or sometimes piercings, your body will reject implants and technology, especially being implanted into you. There's certain genes that cause that rejection. And they've now, through CRISPR research, figured out how to shut those genes off. And they figured out a nanotechnology that would go in and shut those genes off. So that when they start things like, let's go with something that everyone's heard about, Neuralink. When they start implanting our brains with Neuralink, our brain won't just kick that chip out of it, right? Our body will be like, oh, okay, I know what that is now, right? So if you even listen to what their rhetoric or what they tell us that lollipop, as I call it, does,
Yeah.
right? These spikes, right? Without saying the rest of the world, I'm trying not to get you censored. These
Dude, go for it, man. Honestly,
your
I don't.
cells to
Yeah,
have
go
a
for it.
specific response,
Right.
right? These spikes manipulate your cells into having a specific response, rewrite the genetics of those cells to have a specific response, and that response is to not reject that. So that's they're literally telling you exactly what they're doing. They're just making it sound like it's because of the joy.
It's crazy. All right, so let's somewhat change subjects a little bit. I know that alchemy and magic carries a bad connotation, right? Like that's what it seems. I don't believe it. I believe that you can use it for good. I mean, you can have a tool and you can use a tool for positive things and you can use that tool for negative things. But what's pushed out there is that alchemy and magic is negative, you know? What's your thoughts on that? What's the significance of being involved in alchemy and magic?
I actually teach a one-on-one magic course where I talk all about this. It's basically thousands of years ago, it was determined that this version of human that we are has way too powerful of a mind and way too reactive emotional. Our emotional spectrum is massive compared to most species, like massive. We can go way higher and way lower than the majority of ETs that we would ever hear about. So because of that, we are kind of dangerous when it comes to being magicians or performing magic. And so we were given a bunch of magic systems that, channel some type of god or gain the favor of some type of spirit or win the favor of the elementals so that they will perform the energetic response, the magic for us, right? And that's because we're not taught how to control this or our actions. I was taught all of those things because I was also taught how to control those things, right? Like I know how to, keep my energy from killing my neighbor, as an example, right? Where the average person wouldn't. There's a TV series called The Magicians. It's kind of like a Harry Potter for adults, but in that series, they actually show something that's very true. The students want to learn what they call battle magic, like an offensive magic, like the ability to actually fight someone with magic, right? And it's been determined that they're not allowed because they're so emotional. And so they actually have a spell that takes their emotions out of them and puts it into a bottle, contains it into this bottle until they're done using the magic, and then they can get their emotions back, right? At one time they go to do this, there's like a couple and they're fighting right before they do this spell. And then right as they do the spell and she's got her emotions in the bottle, she goes, the way I was feeling about him would have killed all of us. Right. So that's an example of why. Right. I also call bullshit on that. I think that we can train ourselves to be responsible and, through discipline, employ the practices that nurture that responsibility, that make it so that we're not going to do that. Unfortunately, that's just not the way we're taught, right? From the way our brains work to the way we consider feelings. So that's what I believe and why it's not available to us. And then even that, like those magical systems have been more and more taken away from us because they're basically changing us off of magic onto technology. Technology indistinguishable from magic was programming. That was their plan. They wanted to, that's what the programs were for. Learn everything that they could about magic, fictionalize it, bury it, occult it as much as they can, and then actually give it back to us in the form of technology. And if you think about like the average person, they're a soul in a body, they remember magic. They know it. Their soul knows magic. But if you were born here now and you were also shown this technology, that remembering that you're doing would just translate onto the technology itself. Oh yeah, I remember technology like this, is exactly what your human would think. And so that's why they've done it this way, and it's working.
So how is it beneficial for us to know magic or alchemy or delve into these things?
Right at the very root of it, to be in control with your mind, right? To have like a smaller gap between your conscious and unconscious mind. To be more in control of your energy, to like not be as reactive, to have a different relationship with the way you generate energy so that you can control, protect, and use that for something. And I think the biggest thing is there's a lot of people in this community who say they believe all these things and do not act like they believe these things, right? And not because they're bad people, not because they're liars, but because they don't actually have true conviction behind what they want to believe. And to find conviction in something, you have to develop a relationship with it and eventually see your potential to use it. And that's basically what we can learn.
Wow, that's amazing, man. So to me, like magic that we use nowadays is manifesting, and I know you're really big on manifesting, right?
Well, we do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we do all kinds of it. Yeah, like certain things that we do energetically when we're in proximity with our buddies or, you know, our girlfriends or whatever side of that is. Like, there's a lot of magic that's going on there. We're exchanging information we're barely even aware of. I actually wanted to comment on your name, the cipher, right?
Yes.
That word cipher. To me, what a cipher is a type of magic. It's basically like an implant, a translator, like Google Translate, so that when I'm talking to these ETs, they don't have to speak in English to me, and I don't have to speak in whatever the fuck they speak. We can just understand each other.
Right.
And so that's what a cipher is. And a cipher is a type of magic. You can actually gift someone your cipher so that it translates for you, right? It's like this energetic filter that you're basically putting between you and them. So alchemy, in terms of, you know, the way that food makes our bodies work, is a type of magic. You know, everything is mystical. We just forgot to see it that way.
Yeah, because I remember when I first started hearing about manifesting was that when The Secret first came out and everybody was big on that and buying the books, and the message was a great message, but they made it too fantastical. Like, yeah, you can dream of checks coming in the mail and they come in the mail, which was kind of bullshit. But I understand it was a money making thing, but it's based off of something that's real, the law of attraction, you know. How does one get started into alchemy, magic, like, and into manifesting the right way, not what Hollywood says how you should do it?
Well, like I said, you kind of got to be purifying those channels, right? So if you were to go to like a real, like if you knew the people who raised me and they were to put you in a magic school right now, they would teach you something that's called purifying the channel, which is basically purifying your mind, your energy, and your behavior, so that you can channel whatever this energy is through you, right? This deity, this God, this spirit, whatever that is.
Correct.
So for ourselves, that's where it starts. If we want to even channel our higher self and our own energy into manifestation, then we have to start at looking at the contradictions in our thoughts, looking at the contradictions in our behavior, looking at the contradictions in the way we feel, and minimizing them, purifying the channel, cleaning the water, whatever analogy you want to put on that, so that we are thinking clearly. So a lot of people don't really get it. Like when I was talking about the want to believe, you know, that skews the way we listen to people, right? Like, if you really want to believe someone, then if they're saying something that is illogical or contradictory, you're going to ignore it because you want to believe them. Whereas if you're neutral on that, you're going to hear it, right? And you're not going to get overly excited by the things that you wanted to hear them say. You're just going to hear them say it, right? So that's an example. So that's where anyone would need to start. That's what I teach with my class. It's like, I don't teach you how to do magic. I teach you how to become a magician. And then you develop your own relationship with energy. And what magic is in the manifestational sense, even in like, you know, the fancy magic like fireballs or something like that, right? basically you're moving energy in such a way that it collects matter and becomes whatever it is that you want it to be. The universe is holographic. We put kind of like this holographic projection of something into place that is energy, and it almost like a magnet starts to draw matter to it, which is how it manifests, right? So in order to do this safely, in order to do this well, you do have to develop it like a relationship, very much like learning a martial art, right? You got to go through the belt system, or the black belt's going to kick your ass, right? It's the same idea.
So do you need to go to a school in order to do this? Is it something that someone can do on their own?
Not at all. Not at all. You can definitely do it on your own. Yeah.
So where let's say like a person like me, where would I start? Like what would I have to read, or what would?
This is where I'm supposed to say, well, take my class, but
yeah, well, you can say that. I'm gonna put the link, you know.
I couldn't point you to like one thing that you could do. There's obviously a bunch of different things you could put together. Even if anyone ever asks me like what books to read to start to understand magic the best, honestly, I tell them to read The Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, because she outlines every type of magic through that series and how it actually does work. She's doing it in the context of these vampires, right? But she's doing that because it's almost like, you know, having steroids to make yourself stronger. Like the vampiric form allows them to be stronger in these ways, but there are ways in which we could all develop strength.
All right, before we end this, I had to ask you a question, because we talked about a bunch of different things, but in the end, it's all about humanity, right? Because we're living, one, are we living in a simulation? And two, what's the destination for humanity? Where do you see humanity going, like the direction? I know it's tough. I'm sorry.
I guess I don't know how to answer this. I unfortunately do think that we have a lot of, let's call it darkness, to get through before we balance the nonsense that's here. We're in a situation where we have been controlled by this off-world species that is no longer here, and the humans who were aware of them, or at least aware of their structure, now have the power. And so that gives us an advantage back in that we're not dealing with an ET species, we're dealing with other humans. So we've kind of leveled the playing field to an extent. But they also have the technology, they also have the money, they also have the militaries. So it's not really an even battle either. So I think what has to happen at this point in time is that those humans who do have the control have to be inspired to let it go. And I think that, you know, they'll be half inspired by us, but mostly inspired by the failures of parts of their plans. So in a long-term sense, I think what the human race is going to end up doing is diving head over heels in love with this technology. And then that will facilitate humanity eventually waking up to its own magic. I think it's almost like training wheels that are necessary. I think that we've been so kind of beaten down and had it so fictionalized and fantasticized that we kind of need to get away from it for a while to rediscover it again. And I think that technology is going to end up being basically a portal for that to happen. Now, I think that ends in us putting ourselves into a matrix so that we stop damaging this planet and our biology. But whether that's true or not, I think that this path that we see laid out in front of us is going to be a long path. Like, it's probably going to last more than my lifetime. Humans are going to dive into the technology, but I do see that that's going to end up balancing it. Like, I don't believe in like saviors, or like people always say, like, if we just took the Draco away, everything would be fine. I'm like, well, no, because we're still fucked up because of what they did to us, right? So this is going to be how we balance it. We're going to create a new god. We're going to call it technology, right? Let's show you that in American Gods as well. We're going to create this new god. We're going to call it technology. We're going to worship it. We're going to develop a new religion. And that's all going to lead us back to the truth and basically what the Draco just figured out, and what, you know, these powers that be, even what artificial intelligence is in the middle of figuring out, which is that there's one dominant technology in this universe, and that is the soul. And it does not matter what other technology you build, whether it's a computer or whether it's a body, that soul can't be trapped, can't be destroyed, can't be manipulated beyond its own choice. I've got this quote that is, the universe views the buyer and seller of lies as equal. And I say that to remind you that if you are fucked over, if you are manipulated, if you are led into the dark, if you are somehow trapped, you should have paid more attention. You fucked up somewhere along the way.
Right.
Take responsibility for that. You can get yourself out of it. And as long as we keep blaming the Draco, blaming the Illuminati, blaming the government, blaming, you know, our neighbor, blaming, you know, David Icke, you know, we're not looking in the mirror. And so, collectively, we're going through an evolution. This planet is adjusting its frequency, which is what an evolution is. And that creates subspecies of humans, and that creates what we know as, you know, changes in genetics. And so we have this window as well, just on a frequency level, to rediscover magic right now and start employing that. And so that's what I think is going to happen, or is happening right now. And my own personal relationship with that is, I'm kind of just going to enjoy the show and be here for anyone who needs a little bit of logical sense talked into them on the days where the fantasy land is getting a little bit too much.
Damn, that was awesome. Last question, Shane. What's next for you? What are you currently working on? What do you have going on in the future? What are your future projects?
Well, so due to the joy and the lollipops, both of my jobs, my regular jobs, required me to have those things. I was working for a hospital and working with people of DID, dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality disorder, mostly related, like a specialized position related to people who had that through cult abuse or some type of ritualistic abuse, MK Ultra, things like that. I can't do that anymore, so I kind of coupled that with what I do speaking in this community, I guess. So I've got a Patreon channel. I can send you my link tree that has all these links.
Send me all your links, buddy.
Got a Patreon channel where I'm doing, you know, this type of thing, talking about it. I do a variety of things on there. I'm doing a series where I reread the blog and kind of update it. A series where I do commentary on movies, and just recently started to get into doing that on music or whole albums as well. I call that Cypher, actually, which is the idea of just kind of breaking down the mind control behind all these things and why it's working, what it might lead us to believe. And then, have one-on-one sessions with people, either therapy, like I call it metaphysical support, because it's basically therapy with my understanding of the metaphysics layered onto my professional understanding of psychology, right? So it's a little bit of both. And then the magic class, which is also a combination of both. It's set up so that you can learn how to do self-psychotherapy, as well as a bunch of energy work that will get you in touch with your energy, work on your habits and behaviors so that you can be a magician.
Awesome, dude.
Yeah. And the link tree is whatever the link tree URL is, /Shane_Sedore. And I'll send that to you so you can put it on your video or whatever too.
Send me all that good stuff, man. Shane, it was awesome talking to you. Thank you for your time again. I know you could have done other things. And I hope to talk to you again. I mean, if you don't mind coming back on in the future, I would love to have you back on.
For sure. I usually, with any new channel, would probably have to do more than one, because I've got a bunch of different things that I do.
I know.
I'm sure you want to narrow down into things. So yeah, anytime you want to do that, hit me up. I appreciate you. I appreciate everyone who's out there, kind of honestly trying to dig through this stuff without just trying to entertain themselves or get into some type of collective circle jerk over it either. Authenticity goes a long way. That's what the universe will respond to it, even if other people don't.
I got you, brother. I'm going to end the session, but don't leave yet, okay?
Deal.